Voice of calm back at the White House. Trump sat at his desk, a fresh sheet of paper before him. This time he wasn't dictating, he was writing in his own handwriting. He penned a personal letter addressed to Jonah Reyes. Dear Airman Reyes, you reminded me what leadership really means, not speaking louder but listening better. Your strength humbled me, your story moved a nation. Enclosed is something I don't give out lightly. It's not for your rank, it's for your heart. Thank you for serving our country. Not just with duty but with dignity. Donald J. Trump. He enclosed a custom presidential challenge coin engraved with Jonah's quote. You don't have to speak to stand tall. The letter and coin were sent by courier arriving at Peterson Air Force Base just after sunset. Jonah opened the envelope slowly. He held the coin in his hand, eyes wide. But it wasn't pride that filled him, it was something deeper. Gratitude, validation, quiet joy. He tucked the coin into his journal beside the page that read, Still waters run deep, but when they rise they move mountains. In a small town in Oklahoma, fourth grade teacher, Miss Linda Graham, saw the segment about Jonah on her morning news feed. She printed his quote and pinned it in her classroom wall that day. As her students returned from recess, one boy, Cameron, stood staring at the poster. Cameron was known for being the quietest kid in class, barely spoke unless asked. Miss Graham knelt beside him. You like that quote? She asked gently. Cameron nodded. He then whispered, I don't talk much, but I think a lot. Tears welled in her eyes. You know what, Cameron, that means you might be one of the strongest kids here. From that day on, Cameron began writing journals. His classmates noticed and started writing their thoughts too. The class started Silent Fridays, where instead of speaking they shared notes, poems, and stories, all because of one quiet airman whose name they didn't even know. Thousands of miles away, Jonah had no idea his silence had sparked confidence in a child he'd never meet. That's the thing about real inspiration. It doesn't scream, it simply echoes quietly and powerfully into the lives of those who need it. 1 week later, a familiar plane landed again at Peterson Air Force Base, Air Force One. Jonah didn't expect it, no one did. Trump stepped out not for a rally or a press conference, but for something else. The base had organized a day of reflection, a quiet afternoon, where airmen could reflect on their service journal or just breathe. And Jonah had been asked to read an excerpt from his writing. At first he declined, then he changed his mind. He walked up to the front of the room, a small card in his hand. The microphone was on, but he said nothing. Instead, he handed the card to Major Hartley, who began to read. Some serve with commands, others serve with calm, some fight with weapons, others fight with quiet strength, but all serve and all matter. Trump sat in the back, listening quietly. And for the first time, everyone on base understood Jonah's silence wasn't absence, it was presence deeper than words. After the event, Trump asked to see Jonah once more, but this time not in a formal office. They met in the base's quiet room, a small space designed for reflection. No screens, no chatter, just books, soft lighting, and silence. Trump entered first, taking off his jacket and setting it on the chair beside him. When Jonah arrived, they greeted each other with a nod. No formalities, no cameras. Trump leaned forward, hands clasped. He said softly, I used to think silence meant someone didn't care that they were hiding, but you've made Murray think that. Jonah took out a small notepad from his pocket and wrote a single sentence. Silence is not the absence of thought, it's where thought begins. Trump read it, then smiled. You should publish these. I'm serious. Jonah looked surprised, but Trump continued, there are a lot of kids out there like you. Quiet, misunderstood. They need to know their voice matters, even if it's written. Jonah hesitated, then nodded slowly. The president stood up and extended his hand. I want to help, not as president, as someone who's learned something from you and with a firm handshake between a man of power and a man of peace. A new idea was born. A quiet revolution was about to begin. The idea took form over the following days with support from the White House, the Air Force, and even the Department of Education. A new initiative was announced, Operation Silent Strength. It wasn't just a campaign, it was a platform. The goal to share written reflections from servicemen and women across the country, especially those who didn't always speak up. Quiet heroes, listeners, observers. The heart of the campaign would be a book, letters from the silent thoughts from America's quietest warriors. Jonah's journal entries would serve as the opening section. He wouldn't be named directly on the cover, but his words would lead the way. Tyler, Jonah's roommate, was the first to contribute. He wrote about what it was like living beside Jonah, the kindness, the calm, quiet strength Thousands of entries began pouring in from mechanics, medics, pilots, even cooks, all telling their stories in words they never dared to say. Trump made a video message to support the launch. Some voices don't echo through microphones, he said, they echo through hearts. This is their moment. Jonah watched the video on a base monitor, journal in hand, the edges no saw from use, and for the first time he began a new section in his journal, chapter 2, When Silence Speaks. As submissions flooded in for letters from silence, something unexpected arrived at Jonah's barracks. An envelope with handwriting he hadn't seen in over a decade. He opened it cautiously. Inside was a letter from his father. Jonah, I saw you on the news. I recognize your eyes, your silence. I left when you were 8. I never deserved forgiveness, but I've read what you've written. And for the first time, I understand the weight of my absence. I don't ask for anything, only that you kind of see you, and I'm proud. Jonah sat still for a long time, the letter trembling in his hands. He didn't cry. Instead, he opened his journal and wrote something. New words from someone who once walked out can sometimes walk back in. Tyler entered the room quietly and noticed the letter. You okay? He asked. Jonah nodded. Then, in a moment that surprised even himself, Jonah said softly and clearly, yeah. Tyler froze. It was the first word Jonah had spoken in years, and it wasn't loud, but it was everything. A few weeks later, Jonah was invited to a private televised segment. Not a noisy interview, but a silent sit-down with captions, hosted by a respected journalist who had lost her own voice years ago due to a throat illness. It was poetic. Two people both familiar with silence sitting across from each other and exchanging thoughts on paper. Jonah didn't speak. He didn't need to. He wrote in words. She responded with a voice machine. Millions tuned in. He wrote, Abutho kids bullied him in school for being silent. He wrote about how his mom, Uaseto, talked to him, and for him, he wrote about his choice to enlist, not to fight but to serve quietly, mechanically behind the scenes. And finally, he wrote about Trump. He saw something in me that no one else paused long enough to notice. The host smiled through misty eyes and typed out a reply. You gave silence a sound. The segment ended with a standing ovation from the studio crew, not because Jonah had said something powerful, but because his silence had filled the room with truth. Back at Peterson Air Force Base, Jonah received another surprise, a small package wrapped in presidential print. Inside was a custom leather journal. On the cover, gold embossed words read, You don't have to speak to stand tall. Presented to a 1C Jonah Reyes by President Donald J. Trump. Inside the front flap was a note for the next chapter. I hope millions will read it, but even if they don't, keep writing. DJT. Jonah held the journal like it was sacred. He opened it to the first blank page and began writing chapter 3. The Dave world listened. Outside, a group of airmen walked past the window, chatting and laughing. One of them saw Jonah through the glass and gave him a thumbs up. Jonah smiled and wrote, Maybe we all have different volumes. Some are shouts, some air whispers, but we're all voices. And with that, the next part of his journey quickly began. Weeks after Jonah's story aired, requests began pouring in, not from media outlets or publishers this time, but from schools. Teachers were asking if Jonah would visit their classrooms. One school in particular stood out. A small